Okay, we're going to pick up in this video where we left off in the previous one with dealing with diminished and augmented chords, but this video is going to deal with some unusual chords, or some chords that are just a little bit more advanced than the basic C, G, D, and F chords that we did in the other video. Will cause you to think just a little bit, and also make sure that you really know your key signatures for this. So we're going to start with a B chord. I'm going to draw a B chord here. I'm going to draw a B, a D, and an F. And we're going to figure out first, is that major, minor, diminished, or augmented? Well, you have to think about the key signature for B major. It has 5 sharps, F, C, G, D, A. That's the key signature for B major. So basically what I have drawn here is a B diminished chord. Right off the bat, I've started with a diminished chord because for it to be major, I should have a D sharp here, and I should have an F sharp here. So that would be B major. Okay? So to make it a B minor chord, I would have a B, a D, and I'd still have an F sharp up here. But that would be B minor. Now, so what happens if I want to go diminished? I go back to what I had originally drawn, B, D, and F. That's B diminished. Now remember, these are like bar lines, all new measures, so these sharps don't apply over here, okay? Now, what if I want to go to B augmented? Okay, so to go to B augmented, I want a B augmented chord. I need to first start with my B major chord. I need to figure out what a B major chord is. B, D sharp, and F sharp. Now what do I do to make a major chord augmented? To make a major chord augmented, I raise the 5th, a half step. Well, what's the 5th? The 5th is an F. Well, it's already been raised. It's already an F sharp. So what do I do with that chord? To make it augmented, I have to raise the 5th. Again, because the 5th really is not raised here. That's what the 5th is. Even though it has a sharp in front of it, it's not been raised. That's your traditional B major chord. So I actually have to raise it another half step. Well, even though the F has a sharp in front of it, I have to raise it again. Remember, I can't go to a G. I have to keep the F. I have to have the B, the D, and the F, B, D, F on all of these. It's just changing the symbols in front of it. So we have what's called a double sharp. And a double sharp sign means you raise it 2 half steps. So an F raised 1 half step is an F sharp, and if you raise it again on the actual keyboard, you're playing a G, but you don't call it a G, you would call it an F double sharp. An F double sharp. So the double sharp sign is kind of like a little X. It's kind of got a little things on the side of it, but it basically looks like a little X. If you see that in front of a note, that means a double sharp. And that means you raise it 2 half steps. So in reality, if you look at the piano keyboard, I'm actually playing a G on the keyboard when I'm playing that. I could play a B, a D sharp, and a G, and it would be the same thing, B, D sharp, and a G. But you don't write it that way in music. You wouldn't write it that way. You'd write it with the double sharp inside there, even though it's been played like that. So that's something that's a little bit confusing. You've got to know that key signature, and you've got to realize that when you raise a sharp, then that makes it a double sharp. It's like, well, let's try something more like this. So let's go with an E chord next. E, G sharp, and B. So that's an E, a G sharp, and a B. That's actually an E minor chord. You should know that the G sharp, or it would have to be sharp B major. So what if I wanted to make this an E augmented chord? I would have to first know that, well, I've got to fix my G in the middle. It's going to be a G sharp. Now it's major. Now to make a major chord augmented, I raise the 5th a half step, which is going to be the B. I'm going to raise the B a half step. You would look at that and think, well, B sharp, that's a C, but you can't write it as a C. You've got to keep it as a B sharp. Okay, so that's that. Now I'm going to erase these here. We're going to start with something different here now. We'll start with the E, the G, but I want to go to the flats. Let's talk about flats a little bit here. So let's say I want an E flat. Well, let's just start with E flat major, because all three of these are going to be, four of these will be fun to do. So E flat major. Well, to be E flat major, I'd have to have an E flat. And I need to know that in the key of E flat major, there's three flats, B flat, E flat, and A flat. So I got a B here, so I know that B is going to be flat. So there's the B flat. That's an E major chord. All right, so if I want to make that minor, I'm going to go E, G, and B. The E's flat for an E flat. I'm going to have to go to the G flat and a B flat. That's going to make it E minor. Now, what if I want an E diminished? Well, E flat, G, and B flat. And I always start with my major one. Because if I start with my major, then I can just use these rules here. It makes it real easy. So E flat, G, and B flat's E flat major. What if I want to diminish? I'm wanting, oops, that should be flat there. E flat diminished. To go from major to diminished, I lower the third and the fifth. Well, so the third is the G. I need to lower it to a B flat. A G flat. And the fifth is a B flat. Oops, it's already flat, but I've got to lower it again. Because this is what it's traditionally is a B flat, and the E flat major, the B's flat. Well, to go to major to diminished, I have to lower the fifth. So what do? Same concept as we did with the sharp start, I'm going to have a double flat. Now, there's no other sign that we use in piano usually for a double flat, except they just put two flats side by side like that. And that would be an E double, a B double flat, which is what you would have to have an E diminished chord, or E flat diminished chord. It's important you get all these flats and sharps and diminish all that stuff in there, because you get to the point where you just can't say, well, that's an E chord anymore. Well, what E? Is it the E major, E minor, E, it could be anything. All right, so now we've got E flat diminished. Now I want an E flat augmented. So I've got an E flat augmented chord. Well, let's start with my E flat major, E flat, G, and B flat. If I can figure that out, I go, well, how do I make it augmented? To go from major to augmented, I just raise the fifth a half step. Well, if I have a flat sign in front of that, then all I have to do is erase the flat sign, and that would make it a B natural, which would raise. That's how you raise it. So you could either erase it, or if you're in a situation you need to have to draw it and you can't erase it, you would write it in this. If you write it in the same measure, you would write it with a natural sign in front of it, and that would have raised the fifth a half step to make this the E augmented chord right here. Okay. Now, what happens when you start inverting these chords? That's where it gets interesting, and that's where it all comes down to what we need to know how to do, because that's what makes this practical in learning our music. If you can recognize chords, then you can memorize things easier. It's easier to memorize a chord than it is to memorize three notes. If you have one chord to memorize compared to three notes to memorize, it's easier to memorize one thing instead of three. So let's just put some notes up here and see what we can make out of it. Let's go with a G, and then here I'm going to write an E, and I'm going to write down here below here, I'm going to write a B flat. Okay? So I've got a B flat, an E, and a G. So how do I figure out what that chord is? Well, first of all, it's not in root position. So it's best to move these things around and get them in root position in your head to start with, or on the piano if you're playing, move them around a little bit until you can figure out what the chord is to start with. Well, I know to have root position, I have to have a line note, and a line note, or a space note, space note kind of together, and that would put it in root position. Well, if I take this B flat and I move it up here, then I'm going to have an E, a G, and a B flat. Okay, now I've got line note, line note, line note. It's in root position. How does that help me? Well, I know it's going to be E something. If it's in root position, my root's on the bottom, I know that's E something. Well, I've got an E, a G, and a B flat. Well, so if it's E something, let's do process of elimination. Well, if it's a flat sign in, I know my key signature E major has 4 sharps. So if there's a flat in here, then I know, well, that can't be E major. Okay? So maybe it's E minor. What would E minor be? Well, I think, well, E minor would be E, G, and B, because I know G sharp, it'd have to be a G sharp, B major, so it's not the minor. Well, now we've got a B flat, so it appears that the 5th has been lowered too. So if that's the case, the 3rd and 5th lowered, then it's an E diminished. So, and I know that's E major. There's E major right there. That's an E major chord. E, G sharp, and B. Because E major has a G sharp in it. Well, if I take that sharp away, now I'm at E minor. Well, if I got an E minor chord, what's left to do? I have to lower the 3rd, or the 5th, a half step, and that gives me E diminished. So that's, I'll figure that out. So that chord there is an E diminished chord. And once you rearrange it and you figure out what that is, then next time you go to play it, you can think, oh yeah, that's the E diminished chord. It's E, G, and B flat. That's E diminished. Instead of trying to remember 3 notes, you can remember the chord. Okay, let's try one more. I'll start off with a B sharp, and just see what we can do with a B sharp here, and then I'm going to put a yeah, let's do it. I've got 3 of them sharps. Okay, so I've got a G sharp, a B sharp, and a D sharp there. It's not in root position, so I've got to rearrange it somehow to figure out what this is. And I've got a G sharp here. If I bring this down here, then I'm going to have a G, a B, and a D, so then it'll be in root position. So I'm going to bring my G sharp down here. I'm going to keep my B sharp here, my D sharp here. Now I'm in root position. Now I can maybe function a little better. A G sharp, a B sharp, and a D sharp. Well, it's going to be G sharp something. Well, G sharp is not a chord that I have very often. It's not there's not a G sharp key signature. So how do I figure out what this is? Well, there's several ways you could do this. You could think what's inharmonic with G sharp, which is A flat, and you could go with that direction. But if I think about, if I didn't look at these sharps, like, well, there's a G major chord, G, B, and D. If I just cover all of those sharps there, and I see nothing but the G, B, and D, then it would be a G major chord. Well, if I've raised the G a half step, and I've raised the B a half step, and I've raised the D a half step, well, it's still going to be a major chord because I've raised everything a half step. I've moved everything a half step higher. It's just like if I have a C major chord here, you can recognize a C major chord, and I said, well, what's a C sharp major chord? Well, C sharp majors, yes, that's a key that we use, but if I raise the C to a C sharp, I've raised that a half step. Well, if I raise this a half step, and I raise this a half step, then all I've done is I've taken this major chord, and I've raised everything a half step. So this is still a major chord if everything has gone up a half step. So this was C major, this would be C sharp major. Okay. Well, I look at this and I think, well, it's G, B, and D would be G major and everything's sharp. So that's one way that you could think of it. The other way you can think of it is to think about trying to play a G sharp major scale. Well, that's not a typical scale for you because G sharp major, we don't have a G sharp major scale. But you could start on a G sharp and play it up. You would be playing an A flat major scale because G sharp and A flat's in harmonic with each other. And at that point, you would realize you're playing the B sharp and the D sharp, in that case. So that was a little confusing. That is a little bit confusing to see. But you just have to play around with it a little bit and rearrange things. You're not going to see that in your level 2 or 3 or 4 piano book. That's going to be something you're going to see in some piece of music that you play one day. But you can figure out what these chords are if you know your key signatures, if you know these basic rules. So these chords are a little different. They're a little more difficult. You just have to think about them. But just remember your rules, remember your key signatures, and remember that every note has to be accounted for. I can't call this B sharp a C. Okay, I can't say G sharp, C, and D sharp. I can't do that. I have to have every note, every third. From here to here's a third, and from here to here's a third. I have to have all 3 of those notes, those letters accounted for, and then I just change the sharps to the flats within them.